Okay, so we've got the question there. Are you a wriggler? And why are we thinking about that in particular? Well, Jesus has said in these verses, he says in two things. In verse 21, he says, "You've heard that it was said, you shall not murder." And then he says, "But I say to you," and he goes on to explain what the real meaning of that is. And the same in verse 27, "You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you," and then he goes on to expand what was going on. And you've got here wrigglers, and who he's talking about is the religious people who taught how to keep God's commandments, God's laws. Okay, and they were basically looking at the Ten Commandments, and they were reading the words, "You shall not commit murder, you shall not commit adultery," and they were saying, right, well, how do we kind of explain that to the people? And they were looking at it in a very literal sense. And they were saying, well, we want to keep God's law. And so they thought, well, it must be possible to keep God's law. So in what ways can we keep God's law? And they basically focused on just the act of murder or the act of adultery. And they thought, well, in that case, we'll tick that. We've done it. It's possible to keep that. And what they were basically doing was shrinking the law of God down to really just the skeleton of what God wanted that law to be. Okay, and Jesus here is actually saying, wait a minute, murder is so much more than just actually killing somebody. And adultery is so much more than just actually sleeping with another woman. And he's going to sort of, as it were, catch all the wrigglers on a hook and show them that you can't do that. Okay, people wriggle in all sorts of ways. So, I mean, children are brilliant at this, aren't they? You know, every child is a lawyer. You know, did you ask to do that? And the child might say, well, nobody told me that I couldn't. Well, they're wriggling, aren't they? Apparently, if you look in the terms and conditions of Amazon's contracts, they've actually put in one section 57.10, on the safe use of wood yards, like lumber yards, that the health and safety conditions do not apply in the event of a zombie apocalypse. Okay, so you're thinking, well, okay, fair enough. Why have they done that? And other places have done that because they put these funny little contracts in because nobody reads them. No, like one company was offering something on the condition that their firstborn child belonged to the company, and they did it to show everyone that really you should read the terms and conditions, otherwise you might get trapped. But you see it in all sorts of ways. People frustrate. You know, politicians. How many times do you hear a politician asked a question, and they talk words, but they somehow you think, wow, they haven't answered the question. They must go to a special school for wriggling.
It's called Eton.
Yeah, but it's called Eton. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and what a mess. Ba-boom. So Jesus has found some wrigglers here, and he basically he's going to hook them and show them that they haven't got a clue what they're talking about. But we can be the same. You know, we can all find ways to justify our behaviour, and so that we think we're okay. And Jesus is saying, wait a minute. Okay? So he says, like, for instance, verse 22, if you're angry with your brother, then you've kind of committed a murder. You've broken the commandment that talks about murder. And he says, and if you look at a woman lustfully, and I mean, you know, these are not gendered in that sense. If a woman looks at a man lustfully, it's the same. You've committed adultery in your heart. So suddenly we're all hooked because we're all guilty. We are like worms hooked on the law of God. And so the question I have is, well, hang on a minute. If the law of God is basically so soul-searching And every single one of us at some point is going to be hooked and shown to be a sinner. Where's the hope? Where's the hope? And Jesus is really going to say, well, the hope comes through kind of acknowledging this and then looking for the answer, looking for the answer that he offers. So just a few thoughts very briefly. First thing to say is that Jesus looks deep into our hearts, and that's the first thing. And he says there, anyone who's angry with his brother, probably anyone with angry with his brother without a reason, because there are times when anger is righteous. And again, anyone who looks lustfully at a woman is guilty of breaking this commandment. Now, have you ever had a dawning realization that something wasn't right? Maybe you've gone away from home and you realized that you left the curling tongs on or something. Or, it's not a problem I suffer with, but or else
not me.
or you wait a minute, I was meant to pay something. Where did I put the bill? Have I paid it? You know that kind of horrible feeling that something's not right. I had a tiny little bit of that just the other day. We went to Croydon the other day, and we had a nice evening. We met up with Neil Richardson, a preacher, had a good time, and then walking back, we came to the car park, which was in a shopping centre, and the shopping centre was locked. And it said, but thankfully there was a sign on the door that said, if you need to get to the car park, ring this number. And we did, and the guy didn't come. He just said, go around the corner, it's still open round there. But, that sort of, we're in a strange place, and, it's dark. Are we going to get home? Whatever the realisation is, maybe you've had other experiences, and you think, it's a terrible feeling. Well, I imagine that the religious people were having that kind of experience at this moment, because they were saying, yeah, we know about the Ten Commandments. We know about, we haven't murdered anyone. I've never committed adultery with anyone, would say the religious man in the temple. Jesus says, wait a minute. The law of God has always been about the heart. Even the Ten Commandments, when they were originally given, was not just about the act. It was about the attitude and the motive and the heart. You can see that even in the 10th commandment, which says, do not covet. That's just the hint. So man looks on the outside and God looks on the heart. Now we do need to be careful, because thinking things do not necessarily have the same consequences as doing things, do they? Sometimes you might think about murdering someone, but the consequences of thinking about it are not as serious as actually doing it. But they're in the same family. They're basically, they're cousins. And Jesus is saying, one thing is just on the spectrum of the same thing. Okay? So let's say you go into the kitchen and you discover little Johnny is opening the kitchen cupboard. And it's the cupboard that just so happens to have all the chocolate biscuits in. Now, little Johnny could say, well, I've only opened the cupboard door and I haven't taken anything. In fact, I was just tidying up, or I was just, all you've done is you've caught him opening the cupboard door. So in a court of law, he's not guilty of theft, is he? However, you sort of think, well, one thing leads to another. And Jesus is saying, look, you've been caught red-handed. Jesus sees into our hearts. Words and attitudes can kill. And basically saying your thoughts actually show you for who you really are. Our thoughts are really the kind of the real us. The things we do, we can often pretend. But Jesus says it's your heart that really shows you what you are. The words and attitudes. And these words that he uses, like he says, if you say raca to someone, or if you call someone a fool, those two words basically, a raca was someone who was thick. So that is really an attack on someone's intelligence. And the word fool was more of a moral word, and it was attack on someone's character. And so it was saying, look, if you're a fool, you were basically a scoundrel. You were someone perhaps who had no respect for other people or God, and you just weren't. You were a nasty piece of work. And Jesus is saying, if you think that or say that about someone, you're an idiot or you're a scoundrel, you've actually broken the commandment that says, do not murder. That's really bad, isn't it? Because, I mean, which of us hasn't done that? There is such a thing, isn't there, as character assassination. If we gossip about somebody, we are in the same category as murdering them. And Jesus is saying we need to grasp that for when we come to say, well, am I a sinner or not a sinner? Well, have I said things like this? Have I thought things like this? And we discover that we're guilty. Telling lies about people, or just spreading gossip, thinking the worst. So Jesus looks into our hearts, and we discover that there's a lot in there that we could be guilty of. All right? So that's the first thing. But then the second thing is, Jesus shows us heaven and hell. Just very briefly at this point, really, Jesus shows us heaven and hell. Look how he describes it. You know, if you say this about your brother, you'll be in danger of the fire of hell, verse 22. Literally, that in the Greek, that is the hell of fire. And I think it's the fiery hell. That's what Jesus is saying. So, you know, if you start down this course, you're in danger of hellfire. And in 29 and 30, he says, it's better to enter heaven physically maimed than to enter hell, you know, hearty and healthy in your body. Hell is real. Judgment is real. Guilt is real. Judgment is coming to all. And Jesus is saying this is shockingly serious. Because we will often say, because we wriggle, and the world will often say, because they love to wriggle, oh, it's not that bad. Whatever it is that we do that's wrong, we love to say, it's not that bad. Whatever it is. Oh, it's my personality. That's just the way I am. I can't help it. It's my temperament. I was tired. I was busy. I was under stress. And Jesus is saying, you can't minimize this. So when I say Jesus shows us heaven and hell, he's saying that heaven and hell is fundamentally linked to the law of God, but our hearts. And the law of God is showing us that we are judged, we're condemned. And Jesus is asking really in our hearts, you know, what is in your heart? What are you living for? Are you living for this world or the coming world? When you make the decisions you do, when you say the things you say, when we act in certain ways, when we go to certain places, when we look at certain things or not look at certain things, what is it that makes us decide what to do those things? Jesus is saying we need to have heaven and hell in our mind to help us with the everyday heart-to-heart decisions that we make. It's shockingly serious. So he peers into our hearts. So again, this is not simply Jesus saying, try harder, think better thoughts. But he's showing us the seriousness of it. So Jesus shows us heaven and hell. And maybe we could be thinking about that in a minute. Why is it that we often think that what we do wrong is not that bad? Right? And then the last thing to say is that Jesus only can help us. Only Jesus can help us. And he gives two scenarios, okay? So in verses 23 to 26, there's two situations there. You've got somebody at worship and you've got somebody in court. You see those two situations? He says, first of all, if you're offering your gift at the altar and remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift. Forget your hymn singing. Stop with your offering. You put down your sacrifice. Stop praying. You have upset your brother somehow. Notice it's that way round, isn't it? It's interesting. earlier he was talking about us being angry at somebody else. But in verses 23 to 25, when someone's at work, they realise, oh, somebody else is angry with me because of something I've done. That's very honest, isn't it? And then the other one is about being in court, verses 25 and 26. And he says, look, settle things quickly. Somebody's taking you to court. It's better, basically, to settle out of church and out of court. That's what Jesus is saying there. Make amends. Say sorry. Sort it out. Admit you're wrong. So it's like rapid sorrow. So that's a great help, isn't it? In terms of relationships. Reconciliation is more important than worship. The psalmist says how good and pleasant it is when brothers and sisters live together in unity. And he describes how that's the place where God chooses to bless, where brothers and sisters are together. So that's talking about like religious people, Christians who've fallen out. And Jesus says you need to be rapidly sorry. That's the help. That's the solution. And be honest. You know, it's our brother or sister who's got something against us. That means we have to admit that we've done things that are wrong. And then for the other thing, he's got two problems, verse 29 and 30, to do with the eye and the hand. Do you see that? If your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. And if your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. The solution there is radical surgery. Now, don't misunderstand me. Jesus is not saying that we should mutilate the body. There have been a few Christians in the past who did this, literally. In the 3rd century, there were a couple of people who literally gouged their eye out or chopped their hand off so that they wouldn't be tempted to sin. And the church had to say, this is wrong, stop it. You know, think. It's not mutilation of the body, but it is what we would say is the mortification of sin. Put to death anything that causes you to sin. If you like, live as if you'd gouged your eyes out. Live as if you'd chopped your hand off. In other words, it's impossible. How on earth could I possibly do that now that I'm following the Lord? That's tough, isn't it? So we've got rapid sorrow and radical surgery. Doesn't that show us how important the Sermon on the Mount is? Jesus is saying, look, this is so... I mean, where else? You know, I mean, obviously you get an advert that comes through the letterbox or on the telly and it says, stop what you're doing and look at this advert. This is urgent, this is important. But this is on a whole new scale, isn't it? Which advert would ever say, gouge out your eyes or buy this product? You know, just chop your hand off. It's that important. No, but Jesus is saying, look, only I can help you. Well, the question I have is, how does that help us? Because this kind of radical surgery, this kind of rapid sorrow, I don't know about you, but I find it really difficult. Could I really cut out all the things in my life that lead me to struggle and sin? But that's what Jesus is saying. And notice, I would say that it's the eye, the hand and the foot. It's the eye, what we look at. It's the hand, what we do. And it's the feet, where do we go? When a tree falls over in a forest, when a tree collapses, it's not normally just like that. What's happened is that over many years, the inside of the tree has got rotten, hasn't it? And it's the tree that's rotten on the inside that eventually the storm blows and the tree falls over. And Jesus is saying we need that kind of radical internal healing to survive that. And thankfully, the help comes in this way. Only the Holy Spirit can actually make us live like this. So maybe you've been listening to all this and thinking, man, the law of God proves that I am absolutely wretched. And I know that Christ sees everything. And I know that what he's saying here is impossible. I can't just be sorrowful for these things on my own. And I certainly can't be radical in the way I cut out all of sin. Well, the answer is that Jesus says, no, you can't. He doesn't say it in these verses, but he promises the Holy Spirit to us who've come to that point of admitting we're back to blessed are the poor in spirit, aren't we? Blessed are those who realise that they are morally bankrupt. Okay. And then just to wrap things up then, so where's the hope? Well, I just want to read 2 verses. Where's the hope? So we've been thinking about murder and we've been thinking about adultery. Those are the 2 subjects that Jesus has mentioned. I mean, really we've been thinking about everything, but here's the 2. Well, look at the verses that I put at the bottom there. From Luke 23, then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. That was said by a murderer, a terrorist, one of the thieves crucified next to Jesus. And Jesus says, today you will be with me in paradise. And then the other one, Jesus asked her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, sir, she said. Then neither do I condemn you, Jesus declared. Go now and leave your life of sin. The woman is an adulteress. She's been caught in the very act of adultery. Now, of course, Jesus knows that there was also a bloke who the people trying to trap Jesus had obviously let him go. But this woman has found in Christ. Notice it's not just, oh, well, it doesn't matter. It says, leave your life of sin. But Jesus says, no, there's more going on here. So is there hope for murderers? Yes. Is there hope for adulterers? Yes. So is there hope for you and me? Well, there must be. But it all comes when we stop wriggling and come to Jesus to forgive us. So we'll wrap things up there for the moment.